One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. You've probably heard that sentence before. Penned by Simone de Beauvoir, it's easily one of the most famous statements in modern philosophy. But according to the source material we're digging into today, those exact words triggered a profound cultural ripple effect. In fact, the source argues this single idea completely rewired the society we live in right now. So, let's explore exactly how. Welcome to The Explainer. I am so excited to guide you through this material. Today, we're doing an impartial structural analysis of our source text's rather intense critique of Simone de Beauvoir. We're going to look strictly at how the author frames her ideas, the historical timeline they lay out, and the modern societal fallout they attribute directly to her philosophy. Here is our roadmap. We'll start with the drift, then trace the genealogy of an ideology, and uncover what the text calls the hidden exploitations. After that, we'll analyze her famous book, look at the modern fallout called the Shipwreck, and finally cover idea 11. Let's jump right in. Part 1. The drift. Abandoning truth. The source frames our current cultural moment as something called the drift. To really picture this, imagine a massive ship actively severing its anchor. The text contrasts the Judeo-Christian anchor of objective biological reality, summed up by the Genesis design, male and female he created them, with de Beauvoir's famous subjective claim. The central argument here is that society basically unmoored itself from objective truth. We chose to navigate by the totally unpredictable compass of subjective desire instead. It was a monumental philosophical pivot. To explain exactly how this massive shift happened, the source introduces a concept called the feminine error. Now, why call it that? Well, unlike a violently armed revolution that kicks down the front door, the text defines this as a covert, relational, and conversational subversion of norms. It happens quietly, right under society's nose. The source views de Beauvoir's ideology precisely through this lens. It's described as a subtle but radical rewiring of culture, all disguised as intellectual liberation. Section 2. Genealogy of an ideology. To truly grasp this ideology, the text insists we have to look at the thinker's personal genealogy. De Beauvoir was raised in a very strict, devout Catholic household in France. But she eventually lost her faith and violently rebelled against the traditional roles assigned to women. In mid-century Europe, the shock value of this was absolutely massive. It wasn't just a quiet change of mind either. It manifested in a highly publicized, incredibly unconventional open partnership with fellow existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre. It was the ultimate public rejection of the norms she grew up with. Together, they actually developed a philosophical framework for this radical lifestyle. They claimed they were each other's necessary love, while all their other affairs were just contingent loves. But the source points out a darker irony here. This high-minded existentialist theory of ultimate freedom essentially provided a convenient intellectual hall pass for some deeply troubling actions. Section 3. The hidden exploitations. The timeline presented by biographers shows a stark, predatory reality operating right behind those progressive ideals. During the 1930s, while positioned as a trusted educator, the text alleges that de Beauvoir systematically exploited vulnerable female students. Specifically, it highlights an affair with a 17-year-old named Natalie Sorokin. This ultimately led to formal complaints, and de Beauvoir actually lost her teaching license in 1943. The text frames this as an abuse of trust, perfectly disguised as an existential awakening. The source leans heavily on this quote from biographer Hazel Raleigh to drive the point home. What Sartre called contingent loves were in truth carefully orchestrated exploitations of women. The text asserts that beneath the veneer of freedom, de Beauvoir and Sartre acted as the Übermensch. If you aren't familiar with that Nietzschean concept, it's the idea of a superior human who operates entirely above traditional morality. The argument is that they use their elite intellectual status as a shield to justify manipulating young, impressionable women. Section 4. Analyzing the second sex. Keeping that historical critique in mind, the explainer turns to her defining 1949 work, The Second Sex. The text notes this 1,000-page book is often treated by modern scholars as a sort of feminist Bible. Breaking down its massive structure, Volume 1 attempts to dismantle biological destiny, while Volume 2 looks at lived societal pressures. But the core premise, the big philosophical leap, is that society frames man as the default, the absolute subject, while woman is constructed merely as the inessential other. In this framework, woman is defined only by how she relates to men, rather than having an intrinsic, objective nature of her own. But look really closely at this specific quote from her. No woman should be authorized to stay at home to raise her children. Women should not have that choice. The source highlights a massive irony here. Rather than simply advocating for women to have more options, the author argues that de Beauvoir was actively waging a philosophical war against motherhood. She deliberately sought to strip away the choice of being a homemaker altogether. Section 5. The Shipwreck, Modern Fallout. This is where the source connects mid-century philosophy to the modern fracturing of the family. The text maps out a very specific, step-by-step sequence of events. Step 1. Devalue the role of motherhood, framing it as a trap rather than a calling. Step 2. Combine that ideological shift with modern consumerist pressures, essentially forcing families into a dual-income trap just to survive. And the ultimate outcome in Step 3? Children are increasingly removed from the home and raised by state institutions. Which brings us to a stark, fundamental question you've likely seen dominating the news lately: what is a woman? The source argues that our society's current inability to answer this simple inquiry is the direct, inevitable descendant of de Beauvoir's philosophy. Because society drifted so far in her wake, we've basically lost the anchor completely. But claiming womanhood is something you become rather than something you are born as, a dangerous door is left wide open. The argument goes that once objective biology is totally discarded, subjective feelings are given absolute power to dictate reality. And this, the source warns, paves the way for bad actors to exploit women and their spaces today under the guise of self-identification. Section 6. Idea 11. The other sex. Placing her within a broader taxonomy of destruction, the author traces a direct lineage of what they call bad ideas. We move chronologically from Karl Marx's oppressor versus oppressed dynamics to Charles Fourier's utopian dream of state-raised kids, through Margaret Sanger viewing children as hindrances, landing finally at Idea 11. The source argues de Beauvoir's assertion that women are made, not born, was literally the final puzzle piece needed to fulfill Fourier's vision of replacing the family with the state. The source doesn't just leave us with a historical critique, it issues a pretty powerful mandate. It's a specific call to action. Recognize this ideological fallout happening all around us, resist the subjective drift of the feminine error, and actively work toward restoring anchored, objective truths in our culture. We end right where we began, with the core of her philosophy. Woman is not a completed reality, but rather a becoming. Based on the stark timeline and the evidence our source presented today, we have to ask a really profound question. Did this philosophy genuinely liberate women? Or, by erasing their objective biological reality, did it simply provide the blueprint for their erasure? It's a heavy question for sure, but it's one the source demands we answer. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.